Hey YouTube. So I got a request from someone to do a video on my watering system. So I guess that means I'm a real YouTuber now, that somebody actually requested a video for me to do. So anyhow, with that said, uh, this is my current watering system, and I'm going to kind of go over the pros and cons of it. Of what I think about it, and tell you a little bit about how I want it to be in the future. So I've got a 275 gallon tote right here, and it feeds into these two 70 gallon water tanks. And remember, we've got about close to 300 head of goats right now. Um, it comes in here and splits off. I've got a fitting, goes down to a garden hose fitting and a splitter to run to these two tanks. So pretty common sense deal. I like the brass or metal fittings better. They make some plastic ones. Those are kind of junk. Don't get those. Same thing for the hoses. These are metal metal fittings that go on the end of those hoses. Don't get the plastic ones. And then I've just got some really cheap over the top floats. These are Little Giant floats, and they don't work great, but they're the best thing I've found for this low pressure gravity system that I'm running on. Because everything is so low to the ground, there's very little pressure running through these lines, and that creates a lot of problems. You can't put, a lot of other floats won't work on this, and it fills slowly. So these tanks, one thing I like about these tanks is that they're a little bit bigger. I wouldn't want to have, one just really small tank on this system to water these goats because of my refill time. The refill time on this is pretty slow, but it works out for the number of goats I have, having these two 70-gallon tanks to feed them. And so far, I've done okay with it. It hasn't been a problem. I'll say the other issue is when you have these totes around, you'll get some algae in them growing after a while, just because the water doesn't, it's not moving through there real fast, and the algae will get to where if it gets bad enough, it'll plug up your float, or plug up in your hose somewhere, or in the valve, in the fitting somewhere, coming out of that tote. So that is something that you'll have to fight with if you did something like this, to where your float valves into your tanks will quit running, and you'll have to take stuff apart and clean them out. So that's one of the biggest struggles I've had. The other thing is, you get animals coming in here and they might knock these floats off. This is not an ideal setup I have right here. Goat animals come in here to water. They can step over this hose and get tangled in here, and they could rip it off if they wanted to. So if you have a setup like this, you're checking water every day. You can't just leave it be and depend on it. So it doesn't work like that. To fill this setup, I have the exact same tote. I've got a second one that I put in the back of my pickup, and I fill up with, this is a half-ton pickup, and I fill that tote up, and then I come over here and I have a 2-inch hose that comes out of that tote, and I fill into this tote from my pickup. So there's enough gravity flow that it'll flow into this tank and fill it up from my pickup. And I think I said before in one of my videos, it's real important on the tank that's in your pickup to have like a 1.5 or 2-inch kind of a big hose coming off of it, so that you can fill your tote on the ground in a reasonable amount of time. I'm able to do it in, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes or so is how long it takes usually to empty the tote off the pickup truck. So that's the system I do right now. These totes, you should be able to get them for free, or $50, no more than that. And it's a pretty cheap setup. I don't know, I probably, between the tanks and the totes and the floats and the fittings, there's probably, I wouldn't think there's more than $300 here. But the cool part about it, okay, so this is what I've been doing as a starter setup. and it's okay, it's not great. But what I want to do is I want to do the same kind of system, but I'm going to put these totes on a wagon. And so when I put them on a wagon, I get them up off the ground a little bit, and I'll have better flow into the tanks. So I'll have a little bit more pressure in my lines, so things will run better. But in addition, that wagon, I can pull that wagon to water, and I can put a hose in there, and put a float on the hose, and I can walk away. Whereas right now I put that tote in the back of my pickup, and I got to stay there until it fills up, and that's about a 45-minute process for me with the pressure that I have to use to fill it up with a garden hose. So that's a lot of downtime that you don't really want to have. Maybe it's not as big a deal for some, but then the other thing is how much water you can move. If you get a wagon, okay, you can put, my plan is to put maybe 4 of these on a wagon. So I'll have over 1,100 gallons of water capacity on a wagon with essentially $200 worth of tank. And so if you were to go out and try to buy a 1,000-gallon tank, it's going to cost you a lot more than that. You know, it's going to be tough to find one. And then in addition to all that, if I have 4 of these on a wagon, even if 2 of them are plumbed together, if one of them, if a float comes off on one of these tanks while, you know, out in the pasture, and it drains a tote, okay, well, I still have my other tote or other 2 totes or other 3 totes on the wagon that are still full. And so they're operating their separate tanks. So even if I have a little problem out in the pasture, you know, with a malfunction on the float, I'm not out of water. It's not like, oh, all of a sudden, you know, we show up here and we haven't checked these animals for a day and a half, and the water's all gone. We've got to go get water right now. So you give yourself a little bit of insurance that way, on top of it being cheap. And then additionally, wagon versus a trailer, okay? You put this stuff on a trailer, water's really heavy. And so when you roll out to the pasture and you unhitch that trailer, you got to have a serious jack underneath it, or else it's gonna give you issues when you unhitch that trailer to leave it out there in the pasture. Whereas a wagon, you have that front axle to take all the weight. And so not only do you get that benefit, but now, okay, I can pull that wagon with my little 1/2-ton pickup. Okay, whereas if you put, you know, 1,100 gallons of water on a trailer and tied it to a pickup, you'd have to have probably at least a 3/4 ton, if not a 1-ton pickup, okay, to take that weight, that tongue weight on the hitch of your vehicle. So by having a wagon, I eliminate all that. And so we've just doing something like that makes hauling water more feasible. We've spoke to it before about hauling water to goats versus cattle. You know, pound for pound, a goat drinks a lot less water than a cow. So that makes hauling water for goats not the same as hauling water for cows. And generally, unless you've got a really small cow herd, hauling water to your cows is something that's it's hard to justify. I'm sure there's parts of the world, certain situations, certain operations where somebody makes it work and it makes sense for them. But generally speaking, out in the world, that's not going to make sense. But with goats, you're talking about a different enough animal. Their water consumption is so much lower relatively to a cow, pound for pound even, that all of a sudden in certain grazing situations, it can make sense to haul water to these goats. So this is something that it's not like you want to haul water all the time, but this type of setup can, especially for somebody starting out early on, maybe they don't have all their infrastructure set up, they don't have all their watering locations figured out where they want them, how they really want to set it up, let alone have the money to build that infrastructure. This is a way that you can maybe get around that in the beginning and get your grazing scheme going to a fuller extent faster by using something like this. and then later in the future, when you have more funds, when you have more time, when you know specifically where you want those watering sources to be in relation to your grazing rotation, then you can move on to more permanent infrastructure and pressurized pipe and things like that. So um, anyhow, that's my spiel on this watering system. Like I say, what I have right now kind of works for me and gets me by in certain situations. I don't use this all the time. It's only in select paddocks, select times of the year, things like that. So I don't do it regularly, but it does help in a few places, and I'm glad I have it. But at the same time, I'm looking forward to improving it and making it better. Lastly, I probably should have said this earlier, but I do want to talk about how this is a modular piece of infrastructure, and that's something that they stress in all the regenerative or managed intensive grazing type of um, mindset, is that being anything modular when it comes to infrastructure is generally a good thing. And that's where this one little tote that we have sitting on the ground right here, okay, it works for this small water setup, but this will also be used if I graduate into a bigger water setup, and I have 4 totes on one trailer. And the same thing with these tanks. Like these tanks, they're going to be part of that larger watering system. So I don't have to buy a small tank to get started and then graduate up to a big tank later on, okay, and then I've got this useless small tank tote sitting here. No, this will be part of that bigger watering system. So it's kind of a modular thing where um, all this equipment right here I'll use later on inside a bigger system. It won't become obsolete for me. So all those dollars that I spent doing this, they're going to continue to be useful later on if I decide to move up to a bigger setup. So there's a whole lot of little things that are played right here that accumulate to make a difference at the bottom line. So anyhow, I hope this helps somebody out there, is useful for somebody to make their system better, make their setup better. And anyhow, enjoy making the videos, guys. Look forward to the next one, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.